I'm Jordan.
And I'm Rosanna.
And on this podcast, we explore how to take life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursue a life worth living together. Hello, and welcome to Season 6, Episode 7 of the Relentless Pursuit podcast, Left, Right, Center.
Yeah, I just noticed that you changed the title of the episode. So this is an episode about how we like to think about and talk about politics. That's right, we're going there.
We've talked about sex, we've talked about money, so why not talk about politics? Let's talk about religion next and upset everybody.
Okay. So really, here's where we want to go with this episode, because you've heard different political or different social views at times, but any longtime listeners really know, like, we don't like to, this is not a political show, so you're not going to get a lot of our personal political commentary. But we do feel like it's really important to talk about. So really what this episode is about critical thinking, which applies to all areas of our life. And certainly you've heard us apply critical thinking to other topics. It relates to your personal, to your public life. But we're especially going to apply this today to political and social issues, because that's where we often see, I would say, like, the least critical thinking taking place sometimes. And these are just topics that they just lend themselves to some problematic areas that we'll get into. And I would just say, like, this is, when you talk about politics, people just lose their minds. And it's much more emotionally charged. It could be very triggering. It can get heated.
Well, and I think that's because contemporary politics seems to provide numerous examples in which people fail to use critical thinking. They just say, like, I am conservative, therefore, like, wherever the stance is for this party on this issue, that's also where I stand. Or I am liberal, and so for that reason, this is where I stand. But, like, people aren't, and not everybody, because according to Molly Ball of The Atlantic, she says that our generations, the millennials, 42% of millennials would consider themselves moderates, which means they are able to, when a social or political idea or, something that's being presented comes to mind, they take a step back and say, okay, while I may be conservative or while I may be liberal, I'm actually going to, like, look at this and listen to it and then think about it in the context of, like, my values, my beliefs, and decide for myself, like, where I stand and what I believe and how I'm going to approach this. So we're seeing maybe younger generations, or at least our generation, kind of like, hold on, let me wait a second. Let me just not call it black or white, but, like, let me think through this. And so I think maybe, and this is my own opinion, whether, take it or leave it, like, older generations don't do that. And even the generations younger than us are so, like, hot-headed that it's like they believe only, like, what they believe, and they also don't listen. So, like, we're in this, like, all right, so minority of, like, people who may actually consider what's happening.
All right, so what you're demonstrating right now is one of the fallacies that I want to get into. So you're overgeneralizing, right?
Well, I do that as in general. I overgeneralize.
Sure. So we'll talk through a couple common fallacies. That's one of them, babe. So I don't want to say, like, this generation or that generation without acknowledging some of the nuance and complexity that's there. So before we get too far down that road, though, like, let's just acknowledge, like, it's important to be able to think through and talk about our politics. And I know there's plenty of folks who would rather just, like, it's just like, I'm a nice, ordinary person. I just want to live my life. I want to work for what I earn, and I just want peace. But I think the danger of that is that we, without thinking through issues, we don't know where we stand. And when certain things come up in our community or even in our nation, then we're just kind of blown around by the wind. We don't have any say or any stake in what's happening around us. So I think that's why we want to develop the best skills possible when it comes to thinking through what could be an emotional or triggering and most importantly, a set of complex issues when certain political topics come up. So there's not easy solutions, but the one solution we have to avoid is just ignoring it completely.
Well, and I think something else that is part of the conversation too is what I believe and what you believe might be different from one another. But just because you believe one thing to be true and I I don't adhere to it, don't ascribe to it, does not mean that I should hate you or be your enemy. Like, I respect, I try and respect everybody, regardless of whether they think like me, vote like me, act like me. So I think that's like a bigger part of the conversation too, is like, if we don't agree on some of these issues, like, that shouldn't be a make or break situation.
Yeah, but it feels like it is.
Sure does.
So that's where I want to get into some of the problems that we see. And so this is kind of leading up to some more of the specifics that we'll get into. But what are the problems that we see? So you're pointing out one is that like we even hear like a smidgen of what someone might think or prefer or stand for, and we come to conclusions about that person and decide to accept or dismiss them based on those things.
Right. And that's, I mean,
So there's a lack of respect.
sure, lack of respect. Or because I think one way and you might think a different way, it's my job to convince you to change your thoughts, values, beliefs, understandings, to act, live, and do as I do because I am correct and you are incorrect.
Yeah. So we see also a lot of anger, a lot of contempt, a lot of hatred. Now, this may not be the typical person, but we do know that, like, because it can be emotionally charged, like we often like lead with that, and then if there is discord, then it leads to those emotions of anger and hatred. We also I see a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of ignorance. We all think we know something, but we think that there's one of the fallacies, one of the biases. When we know a little bit, we think we know a lot when we really don't. I also see intentional straw manning. Do you know what straw man is?
I wouldn't be able to define it for you, but I kind of understand what it is.
So, just for any listeners, it's like straw manning is when you intentionally misrepresent the other side's perspective. So if someone doesn't agree with you, then one trick you can take is intentionally misrepresenting what the other side actually believes. Then it makes it all the more easier to knock it down. But that's bad. But we see that a lot.
Well, and that's, yeah, I mean, through lack of your own knowledge and understanding on a topic, it's just like what you think the other side thinks without even actually finding out what they think.
Yeah. We see a lot of distrust, and that leads to a lot of disunity. And so we think just nationally over, and it's good to know history because there are lots of times in American history where there's been a lot of like distrust and discord between political parties and between citizens who have stances in one way or another. That's common just in mankind and in politics. So anytime someone says like this is the most like disjointed I've seen the country ever, it's like, well, maybe as far as you know, but historically speaking, there is a lot of disunity. But that doesn't mean that we accept that. And we do see a lot more. There's so many modes that political ideas and discourse can take place now. So we see like enhanced echo chambers, enhanced tribalism, a lot of us versus them. And I feel like if we're all on the same side in certain respects, then we have to start there and then like kind of develop our ideas and be able to articulate our discrepancies.
Well, and I think that that's what gets lost. Like, right, we are the United States of America. Even regionally, there are differences. There's difference in opinions and values. And of course, right, like you have two political parties or two like majority political parties and people fall on different sides. But for some reason, we're always focusing on how different we are and how not like the other, whoever that other person or group is, that it's like we all live here. This is all our home. We all want to be here for whatever our reasons are. Like, why are we so focused on pushing people out instead of recognizing like we're all one collective group?
Yeah. And the last thing I have is that this really bothers me when I like listen to or read any sort of political commentary, is that I'd say there's relatively little discussion of what I call like core principles, which is like what do we actually believe? What do we actually stand for? What I can easily find is like here's my explanation of why the other side is wrong. And that's a turnoff, and we'll talk about some other things that are turnoffs. But what I really want to know is, all right, where are you starting from? What at the core are you arguing on behalf of? And then when we take any surface level feature, any current topic, how does your stance on that stem from this core that you have? And so that's something that I would like to see more of, and really from me and you and from our listeners would really encourage. And so we have a few things to help us think through how to get there.
Okay.
All right, so that all is our intro. So those are the problems that we're seeing and what led us to want to have a conversation about this. So to be honest, this episode, sometimes it's Rosanna's idea, sometimes it's my idea. This one was my idea.
There's no question whose idea this episode was. No one's gonna be like, yep, this is actually Rosanna's topic.
And I kind of like pushed for it for a while. And then when it came time to actually record, I feel like I kind of put it off a little bit. Just because I do feel kind of nervous, like talking about politics.
No one wants to talk about race. No one wants to talk about politics. No one wants to talk about sex. No one wants to talk about money. No one wants to talk about religion. Why? Because it's complicated.
Yeah.
And we feel personally attached to our values, our views, our beliefs. And it's hard to like put that out there for people to listen to because we're afraid, people are going to disagree and like be combative and attack. And so no one wants to be put in that position. So our goal here isn't to say that we're left or right and that you should be left or right. It's more about these obstacles to critical thinking, right? Like we have this overconfidence in like our side. We have this obsession with like what we believe to be true. We have some disregard for the truth, right? Even the truth on the opposite side, like, well, like you said, like kind of like that straw manning, like,
right. We just don't want to lose.
We don't want to lose. So we're going to twist what they say. So our side sounds more credible. But really this conversation, when we were talking about like how this was going to go is, that we need to listen to diverse viewpoints, not because we're going to be overtaken by them, but because we need to be informed on the issues. Then we need to think about the information that's provided, think about the sources we're getting that information from, right? And evaluate for ourselves and evaluate that against our values and see where we stand.
So in season 2, episode 9, that episode was called Being a Good Follower. And we didn't talk about politics at all really in that one. But one of the principles that we discussed in that one was how even when we would say like we follow someone, whether it's on social media, follow like a specific leader, it's a good position to be in, to find people that you want to emulate or that just for one quality or another, like we're following them. But we also said in that episode that we never want to become like just so blind and so thoughtless that we just do whatever they tell us or believe whatever they say. And so I think that is especially true, like you were saying, when it comes to politics as well. Like, don't allow ourselves to become blind to what really are like complex, nuanced, emotional, and significant issues just for the sake of feeling like, well, this is where I stand on everything. Therefore, on, whatever the next topic is, that's where I'm going to stand predictably. Or this is what so-and-so said, so now I'm going to believe them because they said it. So being able to retain those faculties of critical thinking. And that's actually one of the things that we look for in others as well. So we never feel like we're under any obligation to wholeheartedly agree with someone or something just because we feel like we owe them some allegiance.
Or because we say we're conservative, or because we say we're Democratic, like we have to vote for this candidate or this party because we mostly align there.
All right, so I made a list here I didn't know what to call this list, so I entitled my list 8 features of how we, Jordan and Rosanna, think about our political issues.
But also, just so that you know, we don't always agree.
Well, that's on the list, babe.
Oh,
God,
I'm sorry.
You're killing it. Okay. Number 1, we don't always agree. I'll just put that up front. So, yeah, Rosanna and I don't always agree, which I think is fun because now I have someone who I'm close to who I can share my perspectives with, and we can haggle over like one side or the other and kind of sharpen one another. And even at the end of a discussion, we don't always end up agreeing.
Right. So, I mean, it definitely pushes us to like think through and be able to articulate where we are and where we stand. And so sometimes if we don't have to ever defend our position or to like talk through it or even just engage with the material, like how do we actually know where we stand?
Right. So that's one thing that we thought would be helpful. Number two, are Rosanna and I more conservative or more liberal? I would say that we're independent. And so, I mean, I've never considered myself to be a Republican or a Democrat. And
Oh, BS. Come on. You'd never go back 10 years, go back 15 years. You would have considered yourself
well, that's
a Republican 100%.
okay.
Okay.
All
Let's
right.
be honest.
So we've maybe grown more liberal over the years, but not in everything. So like that's why I'm hesitant to say like we subscribe to this party or to that party, because it's like, well, first of all, like anytime I vote for me. I vote for my kids. And I want to think through any given issue independent of how I might feel about other issues, and get back to just like what are some of the core principles, or just some of the fundamentals that I believe either to be true or that I stand for, that I'm going to bring to how I think about any surface feature.
But in general, like just who you are and what you value, would you say you're more of a conservative individual, or do you think you're a liberal individual?
And it depends. It depends on the topic. Like you can take a look at like a list of more like conservative talking points, or like the Republican platform, and then you can do the same thing. What are the liberal talking points or the Democratic Party platform? And there's nothing like I would never say like, oh, I'm every single issue here I completely agree with this party. So in some areas, and this is why I say like we're independent, because in some areas I'm like, yeah, I really see this side. I don't think that the other side on this topic has, it holds as much water. And I'm also afraid of like being triangulated in a sense too, where if I gave someone like two unrelated political perspectives that I have, could they predict a third, right? Because I think there's some core fundamentals that help guide how we or how another person might view certain things. I still take each issue separately.
That's got to make voting hard.
Well, that's the thing.
Can we just vote on individual topics, please? And I will just pick where I stand.
Right. And it does, because I've yet to find a candidate who like, yeah, like they represent me perfectly.
Sure.
Sometimes you just vote for the person who, has a greater percentage of overlapping with what you have compared to the other person. Or sometimes you vote not for someone, but against someone else.
Sad, but true.
Right. I mean, because you're usually given like two options,
Two
three
poor
options.
options.
It depends. Yeah.
Two.
All right. Anyway. So number 3 is going along with that. We've never voted consistently down the ticket for one party or another.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably pretty true.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes if you just be like, oh, give me the ballot, and then you find like, where's the conservative or where's the liberal? But I don't do that. Like, I actually look into each candidate, think about which one better represents what I would like to see enacted.
Okay.
What was that? Number 3. Number 4.
But do you think most people do that, or do you think they just vote straight one way or the other?
I don't know. I mean, my gut says a lot of people will just, especially when they're not sure, haven't thought about it. They're like, well, I tend to lean left, so I'm going to just vote for all of the liberal candidates.
Now I'm just like really curious, like, like without making a generalization, like when it's time to vote, right? Like there have been times where I'm like, well, we're voting today. And you're like, yeah, I've researched everyone. I'm like, oh, I haven't. And then like I like jump on the computer and I'm like looking for like what's in our district, what's in our state, like what's like whatever it is. And I'm like, why am I now waiting? Because I think it doesn't matter, because I don't have a stake in what's going on, because I'm too busy. So like it really makes me think, like, if that's where I'm at, like, is that where other people are at? And if that's where they're at and they're voting, they put on their voted sticker and take their Instagram picture, like, yeah. Did you research what's happening today, or are we just voting party lines?
Yeah.
And does that help or hinder democracy and where we're going?
Right. Another thing that I would add is that we are slow to form our opinions, for better or worse.
Oh, 100% slow.
And that not on everything. Like there's a few things that come up where I know like how I feel about it, where I stand on that right away.
Can you give me an example that you'd be willing to share?
So this was in the news recently, but yeah, I guess we should probably give some examples as well, and then we'll just ostracize half our audience.
That's fine.
There was, and I don't have the details, so I'm reluctant to get too far into it. But one of the news items is that you have transgender females. So was born a biological male, but is now identifies as female, competing in women's athletics.
And I saw, and someone just won.
There's a swimmer, right. Yeah. And so, I mean, right away, like I look at it and I think like, okay, like there are, I'm not in any way anti-transgender. And we even have people that we love who would identify that way as well. But when it comes to competing in sports, like I think we have men's leagues and women's leagues for a reason, and it's not for how you identify, but it's really for like the biological differences that are implicit in what makes a male and what makes a female. So, like right away when I saw that headline just a couple of days ago about this swimmer who was the first transgender female swimmer to win a competition of, I don't even know the competition, so you can tell how ignorant I am in the headline, but I felt like that wasn't necessarily a win. I think that the biological women who are competing now have another hurdle if they're going to be competing against those who were biological males.
Okay.
Even if they identify. So I don't know all the details around that, but that's one recently where I felt like this is where I stand. Now, there's some other things that I'll add to that example as well, because actually the next one on my list is this, that we are willing to change our opinions.
Oh, I would say we are.
Because there's always something to learn, right? There's always something a little bit more to know about any situation. And so I never want to like be so self-assured and so closed off that I won't learn something new, or I won't think it through from a different angle and be open to changing.
Or just because I don't like it or it's uncomfortable, I'm going to say no to it. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to accept. Well, this is how I feel about it because this is how someone has told me to feel about it. Like I don't think that's right.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, what else do I have here? We do not always attack one side or person and always defend another. So this really like rankles me with a lot of
guys, he's getting rankled.
A lot of journalism. You hear it on like radio. You hear it from like anything that self-identifies as like either a liberal source or commentator or conservative liberal source or commentator. Is that like almost 100% anything that somebody on their side does, they find a way to justify or approve of. And anything that the other side does, they find a way to critique. And I just think that is very close-minded as well. And so for the most part, maybe that's how we would feel when we have like-minded people doing things. But I don't think that can be a default. Like if we're starting from the presupposition that anyone on my side, what they're doing is okay, and I'm going to justify, right? There situations
right,
and people are more complex than that.
If we cannot acknowledge that there is truth on both sides, I think something's innately wrong.
Yeah.
Like there is truth on both sides. It's not on one side, and the other side should not be like demonized either. Like it's just silly. It doesn't matter what side you're on. There are truth on both sides.
Right.
There is good on both sides.
Right. But also like I would be like, all right, I agree with this person on X, Y, and Z, but I disagree with that same person and what they did or what they said on these other issues.
I think that's smart. I think that's fair.
Right. But we don't hear that very often. I think that's a much more reliable way to go about things. And it leads to better discussion rather than just like tribalism and justifying things that are hard to justify. Okay, next on my list is that, actually, I guess I wrote this twice because we just said this. This is number 7. We agree with someone on one thing, but disagree with the same person on something else. All right, number 8. We try to listen to and learn from a variety of informed people.
So I like that. And I think maybe the stumbling block for some people is that maybe like the context of like the group that they're a part of or the people they're surrounded with, they're all just like them. And so it's hard to identify with someone who isn't just like you. So if you live in like an area and everybody acts, believes, values all of the same things, and you don't have someone in your immediate circle or circles that identify differently than you, then I think it's harder to do that, right? Because if you're always kind of fed and told the same things that you already believe, it's hard to listen to something else without calling it wrong, right? Like if you love someone who has different ideas, feelings, beliefs, values, like then out of even just respect for them, right? Wouldn't you listen just to try and understand? Mm-hmm. So like, are we listening to understand, or are we listening to like judge, shame, and tell them that they're wrong? Like, are we listening? Like, what are we listening to? Are we sifting through the information? Are we thinking about it? Does it at least cause you to pause?
Yeah. So I actually have a set of questions that we'll give listeners at the end, but there's a couple of specific questions actually that will help us make sure we target that too. So, and we've done that. Like we're always like either trying to like listen to something or read something that just gives us access to another perspective. And I think that's helpful. Like I never want to get like pigeonhole myself.
But I think some people's fear is that if you read a different perspective or opinion, that's somehow going to like brainwash you to change your own ideas and values. But if you have your own ideas and values, right, it just gets you to kind of like sift through the information. If there's something to take from it, you take it. And if it's not for you, you leave it. But at least you understand.
Right. Or maybe it strengthens your original position because now you understand it.
But it's like this fear of reading something that is foreign to you, that it's somehow going to dismantle like your beliefs. And if you're at that point, then you're obviously on some shaky footing.
Yeah. All right. If you're looking at my notes right now, you just see like it's just one bullet point list after another.
It's okay. Talk through it. It's your episode. Go for it.
This is my show. All right. Welcome to my world.
And if you don't like it, you can shut it off.
Well,
don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, no. It's good stuff. All right. So this is actually at the bottom of my list, but I'll bring this up now. So recent issues that we've had to form opinions on. And I guess you don't have to form opinions on these, but
you kind of
do.
But
these are some of the things that have been discussed, the short list. So we've had to think through how we feel about masks. We've had to think through how we feel about vaccines and getting vaccinated, our kids getting vaccinated. We've had to think through how we feel about Black Lives Matter, about protests. We've had to think through how we feel about Trump, how we feel about the January 6th insurrection from last year in the Capitol. We've had to think through how we feel about voting rights as different states are starting to propose and pass legislation related to that. Same thing with abortion, laws related to abortion, as we've had some interesting things coming out of Texas and other states, beginning to emulate that. We've had to just think through like general, like American principles, like where is federal and state and local jurisdiction? Who gets to say what? The big issue. We've had to think through how we feel about what should or should not be taught in public schools. We've had to think through international issues like America's involvement in Afghanistan or now in Ukraine. We've had to think about, we just mentioned transgender women in sports. We had to think about gas prices and other economic issues. So there, and the list could go on, right? So there's just like always these elements that come up that we would say are political or social issues that we could ignore, but you really can't. And like as we proposed, like we don't want to. We want to be thinking in involved citizens.
But I think there's a difference between being an involved citizen, and regardless of how you feel about gas prices, transgender athletes in sports, critical race theory being taught in schools, whether or not you're going to vaccinate your kids, like I guess for me, like these are all things we should be thinking about. Are we thinking about them? Are we taking the time to educate ourselves from a, non-biased source? And then what do we do with that information? I feel like so often it just becomes this, again, us versus them. Let me throw out a meme or throw out a nasty picture of something on social media. Let's blame one side for it. And that becomes our what? our responsibility as Americans. Like that's right. That let me tell you how mad I am about this or that. Like that's not really doing anything. Like let's just blame. Okay, this person's in power. Let's blame that side. This person's in power. Let's blame that side. Like we were complaining about this 2 years ago. Now we're complaining about that. Like how does that do anything for anybody?
It becomes a lot of noise, and especially when it's brought up on social media through like memes or like quick comments or echo chambers. Like then it just like adds fuel to the fire, the emotional fire, without adding an ounce of like critical perspective. And then you have a lot of people who are, and I would consider myself to be this way, where I do have perspectives that I've taken time to develop, but they require some explanation. Like, it doesn't strictly fall on like one side or the other. And so
Therefore, no one wants to hear it.
and no one wants to hear it. Exactly. So that's why, as far as social media goes, I'm really reluctant to engage in political discourse at all. But if we were to sit down and like have a conversation where we can express and develop some of our views, then I think that makes a lot more sense. Like, I mean, there's certain things on this list where it's like, well, I don't fall like strictly to one talking point or another, because there are nuances, there are complexities and variables that don't often get a lot of attention.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. But it's just that's how politics, I feel like that's my interpretation of politics in America. It's you're one side or the other, and you throw up stuff just to get a rise out of the other side. And when your side's in power, you're smiling, and when the other side isn't, you're grumbling. And so it's like I think there's more to it than that. And I'm obviously not the most researched or maybe most articulate on the topic, but like if we can't see that there's more to it than that, then we're part of the problem.
Right. Okay, so here's something. I made a list of things that I'm skeptical of. So when I hear this from someone else, it's a red flag. It's a turnoff.
Dead giveaway.
Number one, fallacies. Know your fallacies, people. We've mentioned a few on the show already. But like political discourse is ripe with so many, like, and a fallacy is just like something that sounds logical on the surface, but once you dig into it a little bit, it's lacking, it's hollow. So know your fallacies. When I hear people using them, whether in media or or whether a politician, then that's a turnoff. Another turnoff is people who only support one side all the time, no matter what. And I see this in journalism. I see this in politicians as well. So there's, again, like some complex variables, and you and I don't agree with one side all the time, no matter what, because we actually think through things and determine how we feel about them. I'm turned off by inflammatory or extreme remarks that are designed to, like you said, get a rise out of people.
Like once you get the rise, what does that do?
And we feel like we're getting somewhere.
Right, but it changes nothing.
Yeah. People speaking from emotion rather than reason. That's easy to find. Another big thing is when I read or hear people who are just jumping through what seem like they're jumping through hoops of logic to try to justify something that is inconsistent or hypocritical. And so you hear this all the time. Like if the Republicans do X, then the Democrats will decry that. But then once that same situation is reversed, then the Democrats are doing X. Then they say, well, it's okay, like when we do this, because here's and then you hear like a really weak justification. And just one example is with selecting Supreme Court justices over the last several years. Waiting for election. When Obama was in office and there was an opening on the Supreme Court, Republicans had said, let's wait for the election, in hopes that you would have a conservative president who would then nominate a conservative justice, which did in fact happen. But then the same thing happened again as we approached the election in 2020, and then everybody reversed sides. Everyone's like, well, now we shouldn't wait, even though we argued on waiting before. So you hear those, but then they justify, like, well, here's it's why it was okay in the first instance to do this, but in the second instance it's not okay. And it's really, it just comes down to, not, there's no core principles there. It's really just
What's going to benefit?
We want our side to win.
Yeah.
What's going to benefit me personally. So that's just one example. And another thing that I often hear is unsubstantiated claims. So people will say something, and even if that something is true or ends up being true, if they can't provide substance to why they're making that claim, then that's a turnoff as well. Like, I can't believe you unless there's evidence and reasoning that would lead me to that conclusion as well. That's my short list of things we're skeptical of. Okay. There's things we look for. I look for people who are willing to critique their own side. Right? It's okay to identify as liberal or conservative, but if you also can point out flaws with individuals who you would consider to be on your side, or flaws with decisions or like certain platform points.
And we saw that right with the January 6th insurrection, when they were like, at the time, like voting to impeach Trump because of it. And, people were standing against their own side to say like this is my party.
Right. You had Republicans.
This is where I stand.
Yeah.
I don't stand for that.
Right.
And, I think regardless of what side you're on, for someone to stand up and say like, this is my party, this is my side, but I can't align with someone who would allow that to happen. That was like a moment for me to be like, wow.
You've thought through this, right?
Correct.
But then you see like often there's political retribution against people who actually,
is.
So that's one thing that we look for. It's like, okay, then there's that's someone who is thinking through. They're saying the unpredictable thing, and I respect that.
And it's maybe because they care,
right,
about something bigger and more than themselves.
Right. I also we look for people who cite their reasons for holding a particular view. Like it's okay to have a view, but when they can express, like, here's some of the core principles that I'm basing this view off of, then I can respect that.
Or not even like letting how you feel personally because of your values, like saying like this is where I stand on this issue because they're in line with my values and this is what I believe. But I also believe that the government has no say in people's rights over this.
Oh, so it's not a political issue then.
Right.
Yeah. We look for actual arguments.
As opposed to?
Well, like things that are in context. So sometimes you take like quick quotes or sound bites from somebody and it sounds extreme, but then you actually read through like what the actual transcript says or what the full context of their reasoning is. Then I might not agree with them, but that's at least what I look for, like really looking to hear someone out before I just jump to the sound bite and determine that sounds extreme or dangerous and I'm not going to hear them out. Well, you can still hear
in the
them.
Context of,
yeah,
it makes sense.
We look for people who hold complex views and explain what those views are and why.
Okay.
A lot of times, like, views are so binary. All right, so we've been there. And we also look for evidence. Like, all right, if you have this particular view, like, where's the evidence? All right, so I think we're getting towards the end of the conversation. Here are the things. Here are some specific things that I use to check myself. So I want to get to what I consider to be what my core principle. What do I believe in? What am I willing to stand up for?
Okay.
And sometimes we receive these from other people, especially as we're growing up and we hear like parents talking or, just our community, or we have like one person that we kind of blindly follow. But I want to determine for myself how I feel about and where I stand on a particular issue. So before I get to any questions, one thing is I check myself when I feel a reaction coming on, because that's emotional. And so much is geared towards eliciting that emotional response that I've become very skeptical of it. And that's where I take a step back. So here's some things that we ask ourselves. First thing I ask myself is, what do I actually believe? And why do I believe that?
Do you know that's a hard question? Like you're good at a lot of things, and one of those things you're good at is thinking. And I don't think everybody has that skill. It's easier like to say that like this is what my parents taught me, or this is what so and so said, or I align with this. And so it's easier to not think, and it's easier to just be handed something and then you just keep holding it. And I think it's much harder to sift through it and to figure out where you stand. And it actually takes a lot of time. And this is unrelated to politics, but a couple years ago, like I took some time to actually sit back and figure out what I wanted about what I wanted my life to look like and what was next for me. And that took 3 months of intentionally sitting down and quieting the noise around me and thinking about it. So if you ever thought about something, it's actually really hard. A lot of times it's easier just to yes, no. But when you don't know, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so if you're not willing to do the work, you're probably going to find that you're often lost and just doing the same thing.
You know what I found too is when someone expresses a political view, even asking, oh, why? I've noticed many people immediately get defensive. Why would you question me? This is what it is. And you've seen that too.
This is what it is.
Right.
Is it though?
That's just what we stand for. It's well, can you explain? And I hold myself to the same standard. And if I can't explain it, then another thing that is okay is it's okay not to have a view or to be in the process of developing one and to say so.
How about it's also okay to acknowledge the fact that you're completely ignorant and have no clue?
That's what I was saying. But,
okay. Well, sometimes it just needs to be.
I wouldn't phrase it like that.
Well, I would, because you've often pressed me well, what do you think about this? And I'll look at you and be I've never even thought about it.
Right.
Why? I don't know, because it's easier to be ignorant. So even acknowledging that, yeah, it's a scary place to be. So how do you not be like that? Well, you got to take the time to hash through it and think about it.
Yeah. All right. So that was question 1. What do I believe and why? Question 2 is there any opportunity for unity, understanding, or a middle ground with these views?
Isn't the answer always yes?
No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
But at least asking the question helps us look for that opportunity.
Well, I mean, for me, middle ground is I understand what you're saying. I don't agree with you, but I will at least acknowledge that there is another side.
Well, that's I have another question for that too. That's my next question is question 3. What would someone who disagrees with me say? Right? Have you ever thought to ask that? Once I develop my view or my perspective, I always ask, I'm almost afraid that I'm missing something. So I'm all right, I know that people will disagree with me on this. What would they say? What are their reasons? Let me hear those out. And then A, I might change my mind, which I'm cool with, or B, I can compare 2 perspectives and decide for myself then even better, which perspective I can now align myself with.
Okay.
So I think that is probably the most important question on the list, right? We never want to hear someone who disagrees with us. So that was question 3. Number 4, on this particular issue, whatever the issue is, who benefits and who might lose out? Right, because these are complex political issues. So there are oftentimes winners and losers with who gets what based on the outcome. And just acknowledging both sides, that it's not there's no one size fits all solution where now everybody everywhere is suddenly happy and that much better off. So what are the outcomes, and who does it benefit and who doesn't it benefit? Next question 5. What are the real dangers and outcomes versus the perceived dangers and outcomes? Right, because politicians will often create a worst case scenario. For they're gonna try to charge up their base. They're gonna try to vilify the other side, and so they'll make claims. And sometimes those claims are true, but sometimes there's more of a perceived danger than a legitimate one. And I want to be able to distinguish between those. And my final question is just challenging myself. Am I consistent with what I believe is right? Could someone call me out on some degree of inconsistency or hypocrisy? And that gets to core principles. So one that I heard the other day, and this was actually from a student talking about how, and this is related to abortion, But they were thinking through, like, it's kind of funny how some people who they might say that they're pro-life will like argue vehemently on behalf of allowing a child to be born. But once that child is born, those same people may not really care about that child or like offer policies or resources for that child to then thrive and be successful. Right. And so and they were citing a specific source for that. But that was like one thoughtful approach, being like, there is an inconsistency with how some people may view two types of policies or two types of topics. And so I always check myself, like, what are my core principles? Do I believe in X? Then I should be consistent with how I apply that to various situations.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that about a lot of things. Whatever your values or your beliefs are, just because the government allows one thing or mandates another, like, for some reason, I think, I don't know. I don't even know what I want to say, but it's like they can mandate what they want, or they can change what they want, or they can rule in favor of one thing or another. But like everything kind of, I mean, we've talked about this numerous times, like we're our kid's first teacher, like what we believe, holds to be true to us, like that's what we uphold and withhold. So it doesn't matter what they mandate, right? You can still function as like the person that you are, with your thoughts, with your values. You can live in alignment with those. Like that shouldn't have to change who you are. And other people are going to do things another way. And that also doesn't have to derail like who you are and what you want. But for some reason, we're always vilifying that like everything is going to like, come crashing down, and it's, we're unsafe, and like that's not the point of government. And I don't know that that's what they're necessarily trying to do.
Yeah.
So it's like
everything is on fire all the time.
So, like whatever they pass regarding abortion or what's taught in schools, or like no one's doing it to brainwash you to change who you are. Like we have total control over our own thoughts, our own autonomy, like how we, I don't think it's like this slippery slope where it's all or nothing. And so that it has to be all conservative or it has to be all liberal. Like we are still free agents in who we are and what we're chasing and what we value. And I feel like sometimes we lose sight of that.
Yeah. And I think the idea is, and I think it's okay, like to obviously have opinions and to express those, because our goal is to make society a better place for ourselves, for our children, and for as many people as possible. And so if we have a view that would work towards that end, then we should express that and try to make society reflect what we would best envision for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what came to mind, and that's kind of how I felt. So there you go.
All right. So obviously, like in the show, like most of our shows, we're not recommending like very specific political stances on things. But you could tell where we're skeptical, where we're hesitant to rush in, and also like just this approach for critical thinking that is really necessary. There's other things that we would love to talk about as well. Maybe I can talk Rosanna into a whole episode devoted to how to research and evaluate sources, but that might be down the road. That's something that we didn't talk about.
If you'd like to join Jordan on his Zoom call for select people who like more boring topics.
Doing a lesson on logical fallacies would be great. So there's a lot that we're kind of dabbling in, but I think these are just important things to talk through. And if you're like us and you want to take time to not just rush to conclusions or get all fiery about a topic without having a lot of substance, then I think you'll find good company with us. But do share your perspectives, your approaches for just thinking through and talking about political and even sensitive topics. And if there's a specific political topic that you're curious about, then hit us up, and we'd love to find a substantive way to talk through that with you.
Oh, good heavens.
Okay.
Substantive.
All right, thanks. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in this week. If you haven't made your way over to Instagram or over to our website, therelentlesspursuitpodcast.com, you can find more information there. And of course, subscribe to our newsletter, and then hit up iTunes so that you can leave us a 5-star rating and a review.
Thanks for joining us this week. Lots to chew on with this episode, so think about it. Let us know.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to today's show. We hope you will use this conversation as a starting point for your own. We hope you're encouraged to think and act more intentionally.
If you want to learn more, you can visit our website, therelentlesspursuitpodcast.com, where you can find notes on today's show, plus additional blog posts, and you can subscribe to our free members list.
Please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends.
Facebook and Instagram are two great places to connect with us for daily doses of our quotable quotes, behind the scenes, and real-time photos, videos, and challenges.
Until next time, let us know how you are taking life off autopilot
And relentlessly pursuing what matters.